year, Japan hunts whales in the name of research and then sells leftover meat on the open market. But critics say it's just a front for commercial whaling, which they claim is unprofitable and unsustainable. Now the International Whaling Commission has drafted a proposal it hopes will appease industry players and conservationists. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. This week, 101 East comes to you from Japan as we look at the nation's whaling industry. Japan claims hunting and eating whales is part of the nation's culture and identity. But opinion polls show many younger Japanese have never eaten whale meat and do not identify with the whaling culture. Kathy Hearn now reports on an industry that has long courted controversy and international anger.
Japan is known for its fine cuisine. The coastal town of Osaka is no exception. From traditional seafood dishes to special delicacies like the poisonous blowfish, there's something for every palate. But there is one national dish that gets mixed reviews. This whale restaurant has been here for more than 40 years. Its owner, MUTSUKO OHNISHI, recognized a gap in the market at a time when most whale meat dishes were cooked at home.
Our customers are both young and old. Sometimes even babies come in with their parents. They all say the food is delicious. It must be in Japanese people's DNA to think that whale is delicious.
But although her restaurant is always busy, her costs have risen as supplies have fallen. What used to be a staple at lunchtime is now more expensive than beef. But Mutsuko says she won't change her menu.
It's an important food culture of ours, so I definitely want to pass it on. I also believe there are many whales still out there, so banning whale is a bad idea.
Although coastal whaling has long been a Japanese tradition, commercial whaling in the Antarctica only really took off after the end of World War II. America's General MacArthur suggested whale as a cheap source of protein for a population on the verge of starvation. For many Japanese, whale meat is a nostalgic dish.
A very long time ago we didn't eat beef in Japan, but we did have access to whale. It's good for your health.
I think whale is delicious, and if the whales are not endangered, then I don't think there is any problem to eat it.
There are other countries who eat whale like the Eskimos in Alaska and Iceland. If it's okay for them to eat whale, why is it not okay for us?
But overall, its popularity is falling. A 2008 Nippon report says 25% of Japanese have never tasted whale, and more than half haven't eaten it in a long time. On Japan's eastern coastline lies the city of Kochi, a former whaling hub. TOMOHISA NAGAOKA used to hunt whale here, but now his catch is a lot smaller. He stopped whaling after it was banned in the 1980s.
I think it was a major shock to the people here. At the time of commercial whaling, there were hundreds of locals involved in it, just like myself. For that to disappear altogether was a tremendous loss for the entire village.
His trips to the Antarctic often lasted 6 months.
It was a tough job, not a fun job. As the harpoonist, I had to stand at the front of the boat, often in stormy weather. Sometimes huge waves knocked me over.
TOMOHISA says he's grateful to the whales because they paid for his children's university education.
From the time we were whaling, we never felt sorry about catching whales. To us, it was just bounty from the ocean, just the same as fish.
I came to Japan for the first time when I was 22. Whale meat was available in all the fish shops, and it was the best and cheapest meat there was. And I was sympathetic at that time. But now it's far more complicated than that.
Welsh-born author and adventurer C.W. Nicol has travelled extensively with the whaling ships and written many books on the subject. He says it's difficult to get the Japanese perspective on whaling across to the rest of the world.
I think people outside are saying with the Atlantic tuna problem, with the whale research problem, with the Taiji dolphin problem, they're thinking of it all as one thing, and that's greedy Japan. And I'm proud to be a Japanese citizen. I feel personally hurt when Japan is looked at as being the bad guy.
Nicol has been an outspoken pro-whaler for decades, but says he's concerned about some of the problems in the industry.
I have heard some very alarming stories from the Antarctic. I've heard of a lot of waste, a lot of even corruption. I've heard of whale meat and whales being thrown away. Old whalers that I knew would not have done that.
I suppose it has changed. Back then, when we were working as whalers, we made 100% use of the whales and nothing was wasted. We used the bones, skin, intestines, everything.
Tourism experts say there's more money to be made in watching whale and dolphins than there is in eating them. A theory borne out by Greenpeace figures that estimate 5,000 tons of whale meat is currently stockpiled due to falling demand. But the Whaling Association says these figures are inflated.
I do not have the exact number, but the stocks depend on the condition of the market. Sometimes there is more in stock and sometimes it is selling exceedingly well. It depends. But there is a constant demand in the Japanese market. So I believe there is no problem in this regard.
MEIBUN TOYAMA is no ordinary Buddhist monk. He eats meat, whale meat, and doesn't see anything wrong with it.
I think it's impossible to bridge this difference in understanding between the West and Japan. As a monk, I believe taking an animal's life, if it sustains your own life, is not a killing. If we are against killing all animals, what will we eat? Space food?
MEIBUN works at the Zeikoji temple in Osaka. It's famous for its bridge made from whale bone. The first bones were given by fishermen expressing their gratitude for a good season. He says the industry pressure to revive whaling is not beneficial to Japan.
I do believe that Japanese people have eaten whale for thousands of years, but to insist it's cultural is merely a political response.
MEIBUN says Japan sees criticism of the whaling industry as a form of Western imperialism.
Japan wants to resume commercial whaling that can be scientifically proven to be sustainable and also harmless to the resources. That is why Japan is conducting research whaling.
Commercial whaling was banned in 1986, but under Japan's scientific research program, it's still allowed to kill 900 whales every year. But in the last few seasons, it's battled to even reach this quota due to the activities of anti-whaling operations like Sea Shepherd. Sea Shepherd says its interventions over the past 2 years have saved more than 700 whales.
Sea Shepherd are like professional terrorists who attack people who are vulnerable and who don't have any means of defending themselves.
We don't understand what people like Sea Shepherd are thinking. Why do they do such things? Whalers' families are scared. Sea Shepherd have thrown chemicals at our whalers, and crew members have been injured in recent incidents.
Criminal acts are taking place down here. Not only are they poaching whales, but they're assaulting us, they're damaging our property, they're threatening our lives. We think something should be done about it.
These opposing parties will be meeting this month at the International Whaling Commission in Morocco. Talks are underway to discuss the lifting of the ban on commercial whaling. At the same time, Australia is launching legal action against Japan to stop their trips to the Southern Ocean. Some believe an acceptable solution might be to allow coastal whaling around Japan while banning all hunting in Antarctic waters.
Even if you go out to hunt 300 to 400 black minke whales in the Antarctic Ocean, it is not going to be profitable because of the cost. It is just so far out. If you could hunt locally, it is better economically for the whalers.
I don't think it makes sense to go on whaling in the Antarctic. It's just not in the interest of Japan. The numbers that they will be allowed to take are too small. The cost is too high, and too high for, anti-Japanese feelings.
When she was younger, MUTSUKO OHNISHI attended many IWC meetings. She hopes a compromise is reachable at this one.
Coming up after the break, we'll hear from both sides of Japan's whaling debate. Stay with 101 East. Welcome back to 101 East. This week we come to you from Tokyo in a restaurant that specializes in serving whale meat as we discuss the future and the impact of Japan's whaling industry. Joining us now is JUNICHI SATO from Greenpeace Japan. Also Masayuki Komatsu, a former whaling commissioner. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today. Masayuki, if I could start with you. Iceland, Norway, Japan, the three main whaling nations, but it seems that it's only Japan that is bearing the brunt of the international anger when it comes to the whaling industry. Why do you think this is so?
Perhaps name of Japan and the combination with it to the whaling issue make global society consider very kind of interesting issue and help any organization, including Greenpeace, to get funding for that. It's nothing to do with the scientific evidence, nothing to do with legal sort of appropriate interpretation of the international laws and regulations.
So are you suggesting that the opposition mainly is to fund NGOs like Greenpeace?
What I'm saying is that whatever it is, as far as scientific evidence, there are plenty of whale resources, and the international convention fully guarantees the sustainable use of the whaling activities. That's it.
Junichi, you are currently on trial for exposing alleged corruption in the whaling industry. Why do you think there isn't more domestic opposition towards the whaling industry here in Japan? Most of the opposition does come from Western nations, from international societies.
I think it's because the propaganda about whaling as a culture is quite succeeded in this country, while it's not actually a culture. Because sending ship to Southern Ocean, where the whale sanctuary is not about Japanese culture, but somehow it's widely spread in the Japanese society. And that's why I think the reason the Japanese opposition is quite low. But in fact, the tendency of the younger generations more opposing to the whaling is getting higher and higher, and demand of the whale meat is getting decreased and decreased every year. So that shows how the Japanese society is also changing.
Masayuki, would you agree that perhaps this is a generational issue when within Japan?
As far as the information they obtain, or sort of the kind of limited base of the information they have they can make such argument as they wish, but I fully disagree. And there are plenty of resources in Antarctica, and our rule book, which is the International Convention for the regulation of whaling, clearly stipulates two elements. That is, firstly, the scientific evidence, based upon scientific evidence. Secondly, you are allowed to conduct whaling sustainably. So whether it's a culture or not is secondary. If you can continue any activity for a long time, say for example 100 years, then it's naturally become a culture. Antarctic operation, which started in 1934, it's almost 80 years ago, become maybe a part of the Japanese culture, but it's not important. For my understanding, in order to advocate sustainable use.
Would Greenpeace object to the whaling industry if it can be proven that whaling can still be done, but in a sustainable manner?
Well, that's an if question, so it's hard to answer, of course. But considering how Japan is reacting on other marine resources issues, such as tuna, Japan has such a bad reputation, and this so-called scientific whaling and the science on the tuna is clearly showing that Japan is not capable of managing that kind of resources. And that's why I think that the international community is not believing what Japan is saying.
Is it then the issue that people are angry that Japan is carrying out the whaling activities under research activities.
Japan has agreed to this international convention and agreed with the moratorium of commercial whaling. And Japan is using a loophole of the international convention. Who can believe, we are conducting science by killing 800 whales, including endangered species. It's such a lie to the international
let me
world.
then just ask you this question, and it's a question that I started off with Masayuki. Why do you think there is so much international anger against Japan and not so much against Iceland or Norway?
Japan is the biggest whaling country in the current situation. And even going to the Southern Ocean, where the whale sanctuary is, it's international water. And that's why Japan is getting so much attention to it.
You mentioned Japan whaling in international waters, and there's a lot of anger against that activity. But a Nippon survey showed that a lot of Japanese people would not object to whaling being carried out within Japanese waters. How does Greenpeace feel about that?
Of course, Greenpeace opposes any kinds of the commercial whaling, because in the past, history shows doing something, whaling on the commercial basis is exploiting the resources, and we have failed that. And Japan's, you can see, even the coastal area of Japan, Fisheries Agency is so incapable of regulating the marine resources. And why can you believe that Japan can actually do that in the coastal area?
Masayuki, earlier on you talked about sustainable fishing and whether an industry can be done in a sustainable manner. In August of last year, you were quoted as saying, stocks of northern bluefin tuna, sardine, mackerel and other fish are so severely depleted, Japanese people must change their mindset, and this is when it comes to consuming sushi. Do you think Japanese people should also be changing their mindset about eating whale meat?
No, we must respect science. And we should act based upon scientific evidence. So we must protect those depleted stocks, and we must make an effort to recover it, including northern bluefin tuna. As far as Antarctic minke whales and North Pacific minke whale and blueless whale, which is really abundant, we should, utilize it on a limited basis.
But there is also
that is a
evidence.
principle.
Well, there is evidence that the whaling industry relies very heavily on government subsidies. It costs $50 million to run the annual Southern Ocean whale hunt, and there are claims that there is some 5,000 tons of whale meat that is overstocked. Now, this seems like it's an industry that is on its way out. Why is it still carrying on? Isn't it time to just call it quits because it's not a profitable industry?
Research is very expensive. It requires money, whether you like it or not. Paragraph 2 of the convention really requires, after you obtain main product, which is the science, you have to put the byproduct in the market, thereby you have to appropriately make a transaction of that byproduct, that is to make a sales.
It's all very good to have legislation. And again, you're talking about research that Japan has been doing. But a lot of this research, where is the evidence? Where is the data?
I think data is provided after the analysis to the IWC. But of course, when I am in charge, data for the professional use is not enough. It should be provided in a kind of, readable way for the layman or, global public views. I think the Japanese government must make a further effort for that.
Is the research that's being done, is it a front for commercial whaling?
The science we need to conduct can be done by non-lethal ways. You don't need to kill whales to research them. And second of all, the whalers who used to be on board with Nishimaru came to us saying a lot of whale meat taken on board with Nishimaru was thrown away in Antarctic, while, for example, Komatsu is claiming nothing is thrown away on board. But this is how the science, so-called science, is being conducted.
So let me get this clear. Greenpeace wants an end to commercial whaling. They want an end to the whaling industry. Is that right?
Yes, Greenpeace opposes commercial
What will then
whaling.
happen to the thousands of people that are working in the whaling industry?
Well, it's not the thousands of people. For example, this whaling industry, which is virtually only one company called Kyodo Senpaku, because ex-whaling companies have already declared that they are not interested in a commercial whaling. So it's not really a big number of people.
Masayuki, the heart of the matter for this issue, for you really, is not wanting the rest of the world to tell Japan what they can and cannot do. Is that what this issue is?
I think it depends on the substance of what other side is going to tell us. But
you don't want the international community to tell Japan, stop whaling.
Point is that I do not want them to say to us whatever wrong or misguiding to us. Whaling case is one of that. It's not based upon science, it's not based upon legality, but based upon emotion, because other side doesn't have any, scientific, argument, which is convincing.
Junichi, Masayuki has just said that he does not want the rest of the world to tell Japan what to do based on emotions. What do you say to that?
Well, being a Japanese citizen, I'm also the one who's opposing this whaling industry, because I like Japan, and I want Japan to be a leader of the conservation of marine biodiversity. And that's the reason why Japan should be taking positive step towards the conservation of the marine resources. And that's why I'm really keen to end the whaling in the Southern Ocean, and so that Japan can take the lead of the world, so that it can actually save the conservation and save the marine biodiversity.
Now, the IWC has come up with a draft proposal, and amongst those proposals will be the reinforcement of the South Ocean Sanctuary, possibly opening up the North Ocean area for hunting. Anti-whaling governments will also be able to set quotas for hunts. Junichi, do you think that's a good compromise?
No. As the current proposal as it stands, it has a long way to be actual proposal which can clearly make sure the conservation of the whales. At this moment, whales are the only ones who suffer, but both whaling nations and the conservation governments are not taking any risks.
Masayuki?
People say that it's a compromise, but I think, to my knowledge, it's really contrary to the scientific evidence, contrary to the laws, contrary to what Japan has been doing, advocating for many years, sustainable use and culture kind of, continuation. And also, that may be damaging to the Japanese credibility. And also, I think Iceland and Norway, many other developing countries, are opposing that idea.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. And that's all the time we have for this edition of 101 East from the team here in Tokyo, Japan. Thanks for watching.